Welcome to episode 16 of the AFA Gen Next podcast. My name is Ashley Mahadia, National Chair of the Gen Next Community of Practice and your host for this episode. A big thank you to the AFA for allowing us to host this podcast and to our supporting partner, Advice Intelligence. In this episode, we speak to Phil Anderson, CEO of the AFA. Phil provides us with a review of 2022 and his thoughts on how 2023 will shape up for the advisor community, especially with the possible implementation of some of the QAR recommendations. We also address why it is so important to vote yes for the proposed merger between the FPA and the AFA. Phil, welcome to the AFA Gen X podcast.
Thank you, Ash. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too. How was your break?
I had a really good break. I took a little bit of time off in December before Christmas and then had the whole Christmas, New Year break. We had a chance to go away overseas with the family, first time for a very long time. And yeah, had the chance to just take it easy and relax, which for me was really important. It was a bit of a challenging year last year, so it was great to get to the end of the year and be able to relax.
I think you deserve it, so I'm happy that you had a good break. Good. So, Phil, in your opinion, how was 2022 for the financial advice world? And what would be your highlights of 2022?
If I was to sum up 2022, I talk about it as a year where the momentum changed, and it changed in a really big way. It's not like we didn't have new legislation that made our lives more difficult, which had been the pattern for the many years prior to this. We didn't have legislation that fixed the problems, but we had a change of emphasis, and we had a change of drive. And that was through things like the Quality of Advice Review. We had a new government, a new minister. We had really a new environment, and I think that was really important. I think more so, we also had a change of emphasis. So whereas in the years after the Royal Commission final report, it was all about making life more difficult for financial advisors. Now we'd got to the point where it was recognition that it had gone too far and there needed to be change. And that was reflected in both the politicians and the media. The media were talking about this loss of financial advisors and what it meant for access to advice and the need to fix that before it got any worse. The highlight for me, and I'm a big supporter of the Quality of Advice Review, was the process that we went through from the early stages, the announcement of the appointment, the issues paper, the proposals paper, and then the conflicted REM paper that addressed life insurance commissions. What I thought was, I was incredibly impressed with the extent of engagement and consultation. I personally had probably 10 meetings with Michelle during the course of the year. But also what was really important was that I think her and her team introduced revolutionary ideas, and they were brave. Now, they didn't leave anything in the locker. They called it as it was, and they came out with some really major recommendations. Now, we haven't seen the final report, but we anticipate what was in those proposals paper made it through into the final report. Another really big highlight for me was the AFA conference in September at the RACV Royal Pines on the Gold Coast. After it was 3 years since we'd had a face-to-face conference, so it was just great to get back face-to-face and do what the AFA does best, which is bring the communities together, create an environment where people were challenged, but they also had a really good time. So that was a real highlight for me. But look, in responding and talking about 2022, I have to be I have to be open about the fact that I recognise it wasn't a great year for everyone. We continued to lose over 1,000 advisors. We had the final deadline for the exam, and we obviously lost something like 500 advisors as a result of that. So I know not everyone had a good year, and we've gone through this period of such radical change, and I know that a lot of people have been hurt and disadvantaged as a result of that. So we can't lose context of that. But I think we really did see a change of momentum, and we can be more optimistic about the future.
Well said. And we are going to talk about QAR in more details. But coming back to this point, we are losing financial advisors. How can the AFA help to push more young people towards a career in financial planning?
I think this is probably one of the most critical issues that we have in front of us. As we've seen advisor numbers fall from nearly 29,000 at the beginning of 2019 to now a little over 15,800. That's a huge fall. And we're not going to turn this around in any other way other than to get more new advisors into the profession, which is what we all have to work really hard at. I think we've got a couple of challenges here. One is the number of people choosing to do financial advice at university. And secondly, how we find placements for them to do the professional year. Now, the flow of new entrants hasn't been strong. And my understanding is that even now, it hasn't really picked up. I'm also of the understanding that a majority of people who have been undertaking further study have actually been career changes rather than young people coming into financial advice. So we have a set of challenges to make sure that people will choose to do financial advice and they will stick with the program, and ultimately they'll find a placement at the end of it. Now, I think that we still have lingering issues with the perception of financial advice as a result of the Royal Commission, and it will take time to turn that around. I think that's just a matter of a few more years, and we'll start to see a difference. But there's a lot of work that can be done in articulating the value of advice, not only for clients, but for those who are interested in becoming advisors into the future. If we talk about the other complication at the moment, it's that the FPA approved programs are really quite restrictive. And one of the things that the government has proposed looking at, as did the former government, is how we can make it more flexible. One thing that I'm conscious of is that if you look at what we might describe as the sandstone universities, or the bigger name universities, none of them have actually chosen to participate in the FPA regime. So we have people coming through Sydney Uni and Melbourne Uni for whom financial advice is not an option unless they go back and do a graduate diploma. So the government's looking at how there can be more flexibility in that. And I think that is a really important step, so that it's not so mandatory that at the start of the program you've decided to be a financial advisor, but there's more flexibility through the program to give yourself a greater option. In terms of the issue about placing people into professional years, I think one of the things that is really significant is, financial advice has always been a small business sector, but there was in the past the big institutions with their salaried advice channels, and they were big recruiters. They picked up people out of graduate programs and so on, but they've all disappeared. So going forward, all of the recruitment of people into financial advice is going to be recruitment that is in large part done by small businesses. And that's a challenge because it's a big investment to bring someone on, and there may just not be the willingness to do it. So I think we've got to look at the professional year and how that can be made a little easier, a little bit less risky for businesses that are investing in it, and we can hopefully get more people through. So looking at the challenge of getting young people into advice, it's about the perception of advice. It's about the flexibility of the education programs to get in. And then it's about making sure that we have opportunities for them once they've finished their course and can start working in advice. And that may not immediately be working as an advisor. They may need to spend a period of time in customer service or paraplanning before ultimately they become advisors. But that's what we've got to build into the system to make sure that it's working so that we can get that steady flow of new advisors to replace those who are inevitably going to leave over the next few years.
Okay, a follow-up question on what you just said regarding recruitment. Minister Jones, I think it was in December, he said that he's not sure whether the big banks or the big four will come back to financial advice or providing financial advice. What are your views on this? And do you think they will make a comeback and then drive that recruitment of young financial advisors?
Yeah, I know that there's been a lot of speculation that the quality of advice review may lead to regulatory outcomes that encourage the big banks to come back into financial advice. But I think that's quite improbable. I mean, we need to put in context that the big banks, in large part, haven't just exited financial advice, they've exited wealth management. So whether you're looking at Commonwealth Bank or you're looking at NAB or ANZ or Westpac, Westpac is in the process of trying to exit its wealth business. That once they have sold their wealth businesses, there's much less reason to have an advice business because there's no ability through that advice business to be able to, in effect, sell in-house product. So this speculation, I think, is somewhat unfounded. If the banks do choose to come back into financial advice in the future, I don't think it's going to be anytime soon because at the moment, running an advice business or running a licensee has economic challenges to it. And what's the incentive for them if there's no products in their product set that their advisors could advise on?
Makes a lot of sense. Now, talking about the QAR recommendations, I know you're a big fan of them. Do you believe that those recommendations would be the founding blocks of a new and enhanced financial advice world?
I do believe they could be the foundations for a new regulatory regime that makes a really big difference. I think, as I said before, I think that Michelle and her team have been revolutionary in their thinking and brave in what they have put on the table. I think that's something that we really do need to recognise. We haven't seen anything like that. We've seen these reviews, but all of the reviews over recent years have been about putting more regulatory obligations in place, not taking them away. I think not only have they been brave, but I think they have focused in the right areas. I think that proposals such as the good advice and the related part of that is really getting rid of the best interest duty safe harbour steps. I think that's the key thing. Some of the commentary has been a little bit confused on this issue and questioning whether a term good advice is not as good as advice that's in the client's best interest. I think that's a red herring. I think that it's simply a question about the word. I think what Michelle has proposed is a change to the way you demonstrate that your advice is in the client's best interest or it's good advice. And that's to move away from what has been a very bureaucratic process around proving compliance with the 7 steps in the best interest duty safe harbour. Getting rid of that will be a huge step. I also think removing fee disclosure statements will have a huge impact on advice practices. That's a non-value adding activity that clients don't really appreciate. They get the information anyway through product reports. And why are they having to pay so much more for these reports that they don't value? So that's a no-brainer. I don't think anyone would dispute getting rid of fee disclosure statements. Also, other recommendations like removing the mandatory requirement to provide advice documents could have a material difference. I mean, I think it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I don't think it necessarily means that licensees will step back from wanting to see advice documented, but it will take the really tight rules around it and put it more in a manner that the advisor can build the solution that I guess aligns with the expectations of clients and enables the advice process to be more graduated, so that you can provide really simple, basic advice to clients who only need simple, basic advice and can only afford a small amount. And then when you're dealing with complex clients with complex issues, and documentation of that advice is more important, they can do that. So look, I think that we've also seen, as part of the package of proposals back in August, some of the other ideas that were more strongly debated, and that's things like changing the services that could be included in intra-fund advice, and whether non-relevant providers could provide personal advice. That's created a lot of vigorous debate. But I think when we confront this debate, we need to look at it in the context that there are a whole bunch of Australians who need really simple advice where there is no mechanism for them to get that advice. And you just have to read the media and watch the TV to find the extent to which Australians are drawn into scams and investment solutions that anyone who had any understanding of financial advice would know was the wrong thing to do. These people need to have the ability to talk to someone. So we need to find solutions to address those needs that advisors don't actually intend to service in the first place. So I think we've still got some vigorous debate to go through, but I am really quite optimistic about the quality of advice review. It's now in the hands of the government and the minister in particular. They could choose to put it all through, or they could choose to cherry pick from it. We hope that they are as brave as Michelle has been, and that we get really fundamental changes as a result.
So you really believe that after years of compliance or added compliance burden, we're going to finally see some compliance tailwinds for financial advisors?
Yeah, I think we are. The question is the extent to which the government will implement some of the more revolutionary recommendations. I certainly hope they will, and I think they understand the importance of doing this. This is really about whether Australians in the future will have access to financial advice, everyday Australians, to ensure that it's not just limited to those more affluent Australians who can afford it. So this is going to make a real difference, and it'll take some time to play out. But look, I agree with your starting premise that we've got to a point where the compliance burden is totally excessive, and we need to find a solution for that. And we need significant change. Incremental change is not going to work. If we tweak at the edges, it's really not going to solve the problem which we're talking about, which is access to affordable financial advice. I think in terms of the time frame of change, are we going to see this play out in 2023? I'd probably start with a note of caution. If I was to reflect back on the FOFA reforms, and we probably weren't as enthusiastic to see them all implemented, but the original trigger was the Ripoll inquiry from the Parliamentary Joint Committee, which was released in November of 2019, the legislation didn't actually get passed until June of 2012 and then started 1st of July 2013. So the point is, these things take time. We will see, hopefully, say by April, the government's response to the QAR report. We'll see the report itself. We'll know what their plans are. They'll then go through the process with Treasury drafting up consultation papers. There may be multiple consultation papers where they seek input from across the profession and more broadly. And then maybe by the end of the year, we might see some legislation tabled in the Parliament. But one of the things that we've got to be conscious of is there are bottlenecks in this process, and the government needs their drafters to have the time to focus on these things. So it doesn't happen overnight. I think that if we haven't seen the legislation by the end of this year, then it will be very close. But we have to be patient. This is not going to happen overnight. I think we'll largely be living in the same regulatory regime that we're in now through to the end of the year. But hopefully by the end of the year, we'll have a greater sense of confidence about what the government is going to do. And then, we've still got to wait for making sure that they can get it through the Senate. Look, I think what I would suggest is that we're not necessarily going to be at a point where we would describe by the end of 2023 that we've got tailwinds. But I think now no longer do we have this sense of strong headwinds that we've been going through for a number of years. We're in a bit of a lull, and we're waiting for those tailwinds to kick us in, and hopefully we'll get a stronger sense of that as the year progresses.
Let's talk a little bit about the proposed merger between the FPA and the AFA. Why is it so important for this merger to go through for the financial advice community?
Yeah, a good question, Ash. And look, as a quick update, we've made a lot of progress on the merger. In December, we issued a merger summary and update document and a draft constitution for the new merged association, should our members choose to make the decision to proceed with that. We've also submitted an application to the ACCC to make sure we don't have any competition issues, which we're reasonably confident about. We're now in another period of consultation. We've got those documents out there. We've got a webinar on the 24th of January, where once again we're looking for feedback from members. But there's still a lot of work to do to finalise the merger papers that will be sent to members in early February for an extraordinary general meeting that will be held by both of the associations at the end of February. And ultimately, this is in the hands of members to decide whether it should go ahead. Both of our associations strongly believe in the merits of the merger. And if I just focus on two key things, the first one is advocacy. A lot of feedback that we've got, certainly over recent years, is advocacy is the most important role that professional associations play. And in that sense, we're the ones who have the advantage of relationships with the government, with the minister, with both sides of politics, and also with the regulators. So we have that opportunity to play a role. And when we reflect upon what we've already talked about in terms of the quality of advice review, great work by Michelle to get to this point, but there is a lot of work still to be done by the government, by a range of stakeholders, to make sure that this leads to actual outcomes. That's one of the things that the associations are critically important at. The other thing that is a key reason for the merger is, let's just reflect upon the economics of our marketplace. We've gone from nearly 29,000 advisors at the start of 2019 to 15,800 or thereabouts right now. The consequences of that have impacted right across the spectrum. You could talk about product providers are not seeing the same flow of new business. Service providers are dealing with less clients. Equally so for associations. Our memberships have obviously declined. In our case, not necessarily proportionate as much a percentage as the overall market, but still a substantial decline. And that's reflective right across the sector. So bringing the two associations together gives us the opportunity to continue to provide the services that our members want, to get those scales of economy that we need, to make sure that we can continue to provide the services that our members want, whether that's advocacy, whether it's the events that we run, whether it's the tools and support that we give. But what's important is having the scale of economy to do that. In the absence of the merger, the AFA would need to continue to carefully monitor its costs. I mean, we have significantly reduced our cost structure over the course of the last few years as the membership numbers have declined, and we would need to continue to do that. And that impacts on our ability to provide the services that our members want. That's why we think that a merger is the right way forward. And look, I think the important thing is that we get what we want out of this merger. We get what's important to the advice profession, and that's about the good parts of both associations. One of the things that is really important to the AFA is our communities and our culture. So we want to make sure that we hold on to that. We want to make sure that some of the really good work that's done by your community, the Gen X community, the Inspire community, and the other communities, and the work that's done within our state committees and the events that they run, they continue. So we are really, from an AFA perspective, really committed to making sure that as an outcome, we hold on to those things that are really important, that give people a sense of purpose, that make belonging to a professional association add up to more than just 1+1. It's about getting that added benefit out of it, that sense of connection, that sense that being part of a community has real meaning. So you might have seen that in the merger summary and update document, there was a specific section on there about communities and about how we're working hard. And there are people right now working on exactly that. What are the things that we need to hold on to? How do we hold on to it? How do we ensure that we get the best of both organisations as part of this merger?
That's really good to hear. Phil, new year, how do we make 2023 a very successful year for financial advisors?
Yeah, Ash, one of the things I was reflecting upon as we got to the end of last year was the extent to which the mood had changed, and the mindset. People's mindsets was much more positive. I'd sort of, I guess, we got to that point where people had survived, and they had a sense that with the change of momentum in a political and media context, that the future now started to look positive. And those who were feeling positive, it was a large part was about their mindset. Their mindset had suddenly changed from thinking that more bad things are going to be done to me to thinking that this is going to work out and we'll be able to turn this around. Look, I want to put it into context. Yes, there's a lot of people who had become more optimistic and more positive about the future, but I know that there are still those who are continuing to struggle, and they're not sure what the future looks like. So we've got to recognise that we've got to focus on all parts of the community, but there are an increasing number who are more positive about the future. Now, look, I'm not a personal coach, and that's not my area of specialisation, but I think individuals have a great capacity to make a real difference to the circumstances that they operate within. So having that positive mindset, being positive about change, being flexible. You might be heading down a path, but then all of a sudden that path needs to change because the government's tweaked what they're going to do. And being resilient. There's no doubt that there will be further struggles and challenges that confront us during the course of next year and the year after. And it's about being resilient and working through them, maintaining that positive mindset. So I think that those people who are going to adopt that approach are going to be very successful. We're already getting a lot of feedback that one of the things that advisors are now in a situation of is there's an abundance of people looking for advice. And we've seen so many advisors leave, and we've seen so many advisors shed clients who had reduced capacity to afford the fees. So now we're in an environment where advisors they're spoiled for options with new clients. And that's something that is really positive about the future, about how it's going to play out going forward. If we get some great regulatory change over the top of that, then that will also make a difference. So, I do think that we're now at a point where we can be more positive. 2023 will be a year, I guess, where we do lots of talking about fixing the problems, but we might not have actually seen those changes implemented. But it gives us positivity and room to be optimistic about the future.
Phil, any final words to the AFA and the wider advice community?
Yeah, look, I just sum up by saying I do believe we've got reason to be optimistic. I think that if we contrast the momentum and the environment that we operate in now, it is very different from what it was 24 months back. The media is not on us now. They're not blaming us for everything. They do recognize that things have gone too far and it needs to be wound back. The challenge is to actually take advantage of that new environment, that new, momentum, and make the changes that we need to make. And that's the thing that the AFA and the FPA, should our members choose to merge, we will have to work very hard to achieve those outcomes. But that gives us even more optimism for the future, and we've just got to make these things happen. I believe we can, and I am optimistic about the future. I think we can start to turn things around. We can get more younger advisors coming into advice. We'll have more clients. We live in an environment where through the compulsory super regime that we operate within, there is an abundance of funds available to invest. There's an abundance of people needing life insurance advice. We just need the advisors and the regulatory regime to go out there and make that happen. So I'm optimistic about the future, and I hope that increasingly more advisors are equally optimistic.
Phil, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the AFA Gen X podcast.
Thanks, Ash.
We hope that you've enjoyed episode 16 of the AFA Gen X podcast. Special thanks to Phil Anderson for his time and to Advice Intelligence for supporting this podcast. See you soon.